Dave Campbell's Texas Football is so proud to partner this year with Be Well Texas, which is an organization that does remarkable things within the Texas community. And we are pleased to be joined by the executive director of Be Well Texas, Dr. Jennifer Sharp Potter. Dr. Potter, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Can we just start from the big picture? Can you tell us what is Be Well Texas?
Sure. Be Well Texas is a program at UT Health San Antonio that expands access to evidence-based treatments for substance use disorder and other behavioral conditions.
And so why was Be Well Texas created? What was the kind of the birth story here?
Sure. So it sounds simple to say evidence-based practices, but it turns out that's not actually a lot of times what people receive. So when I say evidence-based practices, I'm talking about interventions that can be talk therapy for depression or anxiety or for an alcohol use disorder, or it can be a medication, because it turns out there are a lot of medications that are helpful to people who might benefit from them. But what we notice is there's a gap between what we know and what we do in the real world. And so Be Well Texas is about moving things from the science into communities in a way that makes it accessible to everybody at low or no cost. We're supported by grants from the state and federal governments that allow us to make sure that when you or a loved one are struggling, because it is very common to struggle with a behavioral health issue, you get the best possibility of the fastest outcome, the best reduction in symptoms, so symptom relief, and that you can get that in a high quality way.
And so I would imagine that, you mentioned the low cost part of it. Is that a big reason why programs like this are so important? Is that it's just more accessible to more people?
Sure. So access means that it's affordable, right? Access is not just knowing that it exists. I can't think of anything more painful than knowing that you or a loved one is struggling, knowing there's a program that could help you, and also knowing that you can't afford it. That's a hard pill to swallow, if you will. And so access is about making sure that you know where it is, and it's also that you can afford it. And what we deliver is the quality behind that. So you've got the quality, that it will work, the availability, and you know where to find it, and also that it's something that's affordable. So all of the costs of what we do for folks who don't have insurance, and sometimes people have insurance, but it's what we call underinsurance. It may not cover everything that your healthcare provider thinks you need for recovery. We have funds from the federal government. These are your taxpayer dollars that are given to us in the form of grants that allow us to be able to find and provide care to people who would not otherwise have that access to it.
Let's talk a little bit about substance use in Texas communities. What do people need to know about it? And do you think there are maybe like some common misconceptions about substance use in Texas communities?
There are a lot of misconceptions, not just in Texas, everywhere, but it definitely impacts Texas just like it does the rest of the nation. I think the first thing to know is that we're hearing a lot about fentanyl right now. That's absolutely accurate to be concerned about it. Fentanyl is, and when we talk about fentanyl, I'm not talking about fentanyl prescribed by a doctor or that someone might get appropriately for pain relief. What I'm talking about is illicit fentanyl. This is not made by a pharmaceutical company. This is made illegally, sometimes in the US, but mainly outside of the United States in a couple different countries. But it's imported here and it's mixed with other drugs. So we have what we call a poisoned drug supply. So it's really important. I know many of your listeners have families or might be young people themselves. It's really important to know this is not a time to play around with drugs. So that's the first thing, because even if you try a drug, the drug supply, the illegal drug supply has changed quite a bit, and it is very, very dangerous right now to try and use drugs. And we know that kids experiment. Obviously, many families aren't thrilled about that. But it brings us to the second myth, which is that it is normal to try substances. We have had substances in our lives for a very long time. One of the most commonly used substances that causes trouble is actually alcohol. And so alcohol is legal. It's accessible. I drink, and that's okay. But sometimes for some people, it becomes a problem. And that's where we really want to be able to provide treatment and help people.
And so how is Be Well Texas working towards finding solutions for these things that are occurring in communities across the state?
Sure. So we do that through a couple different places. First of all, we're built on a backbone of research. So everything that we do is based on evidence. That means that we know, based on science and multiple studies and research, that the programs that we do work. We're also building the evidence of tomorrow because we have cutting edge clinical trials here of new treatments that have never been tested before or are being tested. And so that's another thing that we can give access to. We have a whole outreach team because what we want to do is destigmatize substance use. The number one reason why people often say they don't seek help is because they have some shame about the fact that they're having a problem, or the family member who's concerned about them is embarrassed about it. I often say, when someone is struggling with addiction, um, uh, they're doing that alone. People, when they find out somebody in the family has cancer, the next day you have more casseroles than you can have to go in that freezer because people are there to support you. It can be very, very lonely and scary, both for the family member or for the individual, because they're afraid of judgment. Substance use is not a character disorder. Substance use disorder is a phenomena with a set of symptoms that can be treated, and treatment works. And that's the message that we're doing to get out around the country. We have treatment available virtually. A great story, we had a young person, probably about 19 or 20 recently, who was interested, realized that there might be a problem with alcohol in this person's life, but wasn't comfortable coming into the clinic. We were able to have their first appointment right at their home, in the privacy of wherever it was in their home they wanted to start the conversation. And that's what we think is sort of the secret sauce of what we do, is we meet people where they're at.
So, for folks who are maybe looking around and saying that they think that maybe themselves or a loved one is struggling with substance use, has a substance use disorder, how can people identify a loved one or themselves having a substance use disorder?
Sure. So it's a great question. One of the things that you can do is just do that self inventory. If your gut thinks that you might have an issue, um, that might be a good time to get screened. And screening is really simple. So, for example, um, if you notice that using the substance, whatever it is, let's say alcohol, is consuming more and more of your time, either using, acquiring, or recovering from the effects of alcohol, that's a warning sign, right? So generally speaking, if somebody's drinking more than 4 to 6 drinks a day, that's a concern. So that's another screening factor. If you find yourself being unable to stop using it, or it becomes kind of the only tool in the toolkit, right? The only way to relax after a long day, or if you've had stress, or there's conflict or tension, or you're bored, or you want to celebrate, the only reaction is to use the substance. That's another great sign that there might be something going on. And the other piece is listen to your loved ones, because often before the individual who's struggling knows, there are people in that family system or that social system that recognize there may be something going on. So that's a really key piece. We were talking before about myths. I think the other thing to remember is that substance use disorder and other behavioral health conditions like depression and anxiety can be life-threatening. And we need to take these things seriously. If you were concerned about someone's drinking or that they're using drugs, we need to know that it's a life-threatening disorder and it can be treated, but we do need to take it seriously.
And so, how can an individual get help? How can they get involved in a conversation, or how can I get involved in a conversation or creating change myself?
Sure. Well, the first thing that I often say is we need to talk about these things. And so a lot of times what happens is people are concerned about someone in their lives, even if it's a distant, it may be a coworker, and we don't talk about it. So that's the first thing, is just like, for example, suicide. There's a lot of encouragement now to not just worry about it, but to do something, speak up, talk about it. We should be talking about these things. And so just even, and we're so grateful for you for doing this conversation, just us even talking about this is starting to normalize that this is something that can happen in a person's life, that we can treat it. So let's talk about it. Let's bring it out of the darkness and start to have conversations. If you do want help, every community in Texas should have some types of resources. So larger cities have a lot of different options. We are one of them. But one of the reasons that we're here at Be Well Texas, and a shameless plug, that's bewelltexas.com, is you can go to our website and you can either interact there or you can make a phone call and be right on the phone with someone 24 hours a day who can schedule a time to talk about it. And that helps communities that may not have the type of access that larger areas in Texas do. We want to make sure that if you're living in a town of 3,000 people, you have access to something just like somebody in a major metropolitan area like where we are in San Antonio. So the most important thing is to pick up the phone or pick up your phone and either call or use it online to go and find out a little bit more about what substance use disorder is, what are anxiety and depression, and start to have a conversation.
She is Dr. Jennifer Sharp Potter. She's the executive director of Be Well Texas. Find out more about it at bewelltexas.org. Dr. Potter, we certainly appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And we look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thank you so much. It was good to be here.